Hello and welcome to the Beach House 34 podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth. To the new subscribers, thank you so much for being a part of this journey. And to our amazing listeners, thank you so much for your continued support and encouragement. This episode is a continuing series on the trial readings for the Darlie Routier case. And if you aren't familiar with the case, this is a mother who in 1996 was accused and convicted of murdering her two children in Rowlett, Texas, and who currently sits on death row. As soon as the trial readings are done, I'll be back to doing weekly true crime and paranormal cases. Now, we're just starting to hear witnesses from Darlie's defense team, and in the last episode, we heard the first part of testimony from Darlie Routier, Darlie's husband. And if you missed that, I'll have the link in the show notes for you. What happened at the end of that wasn't anything drama-filled or anything, but the jury was given a break, and the jury is now back in the courtroom ready to hear what else Darin has to say. Mr. Mulder of Darlie's defense team begins questioning Darin again. When you got to Baylor, did you go directly to see Darlie? No, sir. She was in surgery and they took me to a room. Okay. And did you remain in that room? Yes, sir, I did. And were you alone or were you with someone? Chris Frosch was coming in and out, and Terry came in and out, who had taken me up to the hospital, and then Patterson showed up later. Okay. And he was going in and out. Okay. Did Chris Frosch, Detective Chris Frosch, did he question you about what you knew? Yes, sir, he did. All right. Did you cooperate with him? Yes, sir. Did Patterson subsequently question you about the events of that evening? Yes, sir, he did. And did you cooperate with him? Yes, sir. Okay. Were you later on permitted to see Darlie? Yes, sir, I was. And do you recall about what time that was? Sometime that early morning. All right. By that time, had he photographed you? Yes, sir, they did. Did they take your clothes? Yes, sir. And photograph you naked or stripped down without your jeans on and without your shirt on? Yes, sir, they did. Okay. And I guess you were provided with other clothes, were you? Medical clothes. All right. When you saw Darlie, would you tell the jury her emotional state? While she was sedated, she was groggy, but very hysterical and very emotional, ups and downs. Kept asking about the baby. Kept asking, why did somebody kill my babies? Darin, did you know when the ambulance taking Darlie left for the hospital, did you know that both of your sons were dead? Yes, sir, I did. Did Darlie know that as well? Yes, sir. Did you think, knowing her as you knew her, did you see anything phony or inappropriate about the way she acted when you saw her first there at Baylor? No, sir. Okay. Were you able to see her the following day? Yes, sir. I saw her every day. Okay. And was your son Drake brought down there by someone? Terry and Karen Neal brought the baby up. She kept asking for him and wanting to see him, so they brought him up there. And we brought the baby into the room and we kind of lifted it up on top of Darlie. Of course, I don't know if y'all have seen the pictures, but I mean, she was full of tubes and she had this great big, huge white thing on her neck and all of these gauzes and everything all over her. And the baby automatically wanted to go for her neck. And we were all kind of afraid that the baby would hurt her wounds because she wasn't capable of being able to hold him and use her arm strength to be able to hold him. He squirms really a lot. Did she ultimately hold the baby on her chest? Yes, she held him by his fingers. Okay. She wanted all of the pictures out of the house that she could get of the boys. And when she did, we thought that was a good idea. And then when we got them to her, she just fell apart. She would just go into hysterics. Okay. You saw her the next day? Yes, sir. Did you notice any bruising begin to form on her arms? I did, but I just assumed that it was from the cut on the top. Okay. She looked like a whooped little puppy. Okay. I mean, we were more concerned about her neck and arms and whether or not she was going to be okay or have any permanent damage. And we were worried about the boys and worried about all the arrangements and all of the family coming in from Pennsylvania and from all over the place. I mean, it was just about as hysterical at the hospital. Okay. You knew at that time the extent of her injuries? Yes, sir, I did. All right. And advised at that time, now back in June, that her injuries were serious? Yes, sir. I understood that they were very serious. Okay. It came within 2 millimeters of cutting into the carotid artery? Yes, sir. That's what I understand. Did you continue to cooperate with the police? Yes, sir. 100%. Okay. On June the 8th, did you accompany your wife to the police station and write out in your own handwriting a statement? Yes, sir, we did. Who was your contact with at that time? Chris Frosch. Okay. And I'll ask you if you made any requests of him that they tape record or videotape your giving of the statement. Yes, sir. I told him that I could not write as fast as I could think. And when you get to thinking about something that terribly traumatic has happened to you cannot remember everything. And every time I would go into talking about it, I would start crying and getting very angry and just sad and just all at the same time. All right. They had asked you for permission to occupy and search your house, hadn't they? Yes, sir, they did. And that was, I believe, on the 6th, and you had cooperated? Yes, sir. I give them the keys to the house, to the boat, to the sheds, to the business, everything. I had nothing to hide. Okay, you gave them keys to everything? Yes, sir. All right. When they would call you, would you go down to the police station and drop everything that you had and go down there? Yes, sir. Whatever plans we had made, we dropped those plans and went to the police station because we felt that the closer and the more information we got, the closer we would get to finding the killer. Were you told that they had leads that they were following and that they were working hard on it? And yes, sir, they said that they were working night and day for days and days and days. And they were telling us the things that they were missing out on as far as their kids' baseball practices and games, but had a lot of leads that they were following. Hundreds of leads, they said. And you believed them at that time? Yes, sir. Do you feel like you have been betrayed? Yes, sir, very much so. Do you feel like they lied to you? Yes, sir. There is no question about that. That is an understatement. But you continued to cooperate? Yes, sir. Did you plan the boys' funeral? Me and my mother did. Okay, and who selected the songs? I did. Why did you select Gangster's Paradise? Well, whether or not somebody thinks that it's appropriate or not, it's not appropriate that my kids were killed either. So if somebody is offended about whether or not I played a song that was inappropriate, that was their favorite song. Every time that song came on the radio, they would say, "Daddy, crank it up." That was the only song that they ever felt that way about. When you have children, you do things for your kids, not for anybody else's approval. And if they didn't like it, that is too bad because this was my two boys and that was their favorite song, and we played their favorite song at the funeral. What were the other songs that were played at the funeral? I Will Always Love You by Celine Dion and Jesus Loves Me. Those are appropriate songs. By Whitney Houston? Yes, by Whitney Houston. Yes. Darlie sang those to the boys. She has a beautiful voice, and they loved to listen to their mommy sing. When they were buried there has been some testimony about some Swiss Army knives or some knives that were put into the coffin. Yes, sir. Were they buried together? Yes, sir. They were buried in the same coffin. They died together, and they went to heaven together, and they loved each other. Why were knives put in the coffin? Because Devin kept asking me, "Can I have a Swiss Army knife for my birthday, Daddy?" And I said, "No." I said, "It's not you that I can't trust with a Swiss Army knife. It's your little brother." And I wouldn't get him one because I was afraid that they would get hurt. And when they die, if you don't give it to them, you are not ever going to get a chance. Now, there is some testimony that tarot cards were put in with the In the coffin? No, sir. Those were not tarot cards. Tarot cards are some kind of gypsy type cards. These were, you see, my brother-in-law is a magician, a real live magician, and he does magic tricks, and he has traveled all over Las Vegas and Tahoe, and he wasn't my brother-in-law yet. They didn't get married until August, but he did these magic tricks with 5 aces, and he did one for Devin and then one for Damon because they loved him so much. They called him Magic Mark, and that is what he goes by now. So they were the ones that named him. Yes, sir. They named him Magic Mark because he wasn't an uncle yet. Those are cards that he had given the boys. Yes, sir. He always carries a package of cards inside of his pocket. And were there other mementos that you put in the casket? Yes, sir. Things that were favorites of the boys? Yes, sir. And there were letters from all of the kids in the neighborhood that came to the funeral, and there were stuffed animals and flowers, and Baja and David put silver coins in there. When the residence was held by the police for a number of days. Yes, 13 days. 13 days. All right. When the residence was released back to you, did you have occasion to walk through the residence? Yes, sir, we did. Okay. And there are a lot of things when you are walking through there that you don't realize what happened. And Mr. Greg Davis then says, I'm sorry, I've got to object. I didn't hear a question. The court says, sustained, Mr. Routier, just answer the questions. And he says, yes, sir. And then Mr. Mulder again asks another question. All right. Did you see the wine rack? Yes, sir, I did. Okay. Do you recall whether or not you saw glass on the shelf of the wine rack? It was on the shelf. And then as we were getting the house ready to try to sell some of the stuff, there were shards of glass down inside of the bucket. What bucket? It was an ice bucket that was sitting right on top of the wine rack. Is that clearly visible in the photographs? Yes, sir. You say there were glass shards in the top of that ice bucket? In the lid? Yes, sir. Okay. Did you ever fail to cooperate with the police about anything? No, sir. Every time they called us, we were there. Okay. After you had gotten possession of house again, did you move back in? No, sir. You never have moved back in? No, sir. We couldn't move back into there. Why? Because of a minute's worth of something terrible happens. It just covers up 4 years of memories. So you never intended to move back into the house? No, sir. I just wanted to sell it. After you had gotten the house back, did they run a search warrant on the house and kick the door down? Yes, sir. Okay. They had an emergency search warrant for the black cap. And they had the house for what, 13 days? For 13 days. And then they came and kicked the back door in and busted the whole frame and busted the door all to pieces, pried it open with a crowbar. I mean, if they had just asked you, if they would have asked me, I would have given them the key. They didn't have to do any more damage. What did that door cost? Probably $500 or $600. All in all, how much damage was done to that residence? Between $15,000 to $17,000. Okay. What was done with respect to the ceilings and the plumbing and things of that nature? They took the sinks out, and all of the plumbing and all of the traps had to be taken out. They put those in their custody. They didn't replace them. So what they did, it was 100 and something degrees. And so all of the air conditioning traps were leaking into the ceilings, and all of these ceilings were soaked, and the sheetrock started to fall down. Of course, all the floors and everything else was going to have to be replaced. You had insurance on that? Yes, sir, I did. But you never collected insurance, did you? No, sir. They said because of the nature of the... Mr. Davis says, I'm going to object to that as being hearsay. It's not relevant either. The court says sustained. Mr. Mulder then continues. There was blood on one of the boys' comforters upstairs? Yes, sir. Do you know how that got there? I know exactly how it got there. Tell the jury. Well, those are bunk beds. And the bottom had a full size and the top had a twin. And there's a little rail that goes across the top of the railing so that the top person doesn't fall off. Well, Damon always slept on the top and Devin slept on the bottom. And one night we heard this screech and we ran in there and Damon had kicked off that little guard and it landed and hit Devin right here on the forehead. And when it did, of course, he bled and we tried to clean that up and we tried to get him comforted and got him some Band-Aids, and that was probably 2 years ago. And that comforter has been cleaned a couple of times since then. Okay. Is Darlie right-handed or left-handed? She is right-handed. Okay. Mr. Mulder then says, we will pass the witness. Mr. Davis will have some questions for you. And the court says, Mr. Davis. And the cross-examination begins by Mr. Greg Davis. Mr. Routier, you and I have met before, haven't we? Yes, sir, we have. Actually, we have met twice before, haven't we? I believe so. On July 1st, we met? Yes, sir. In the courtroom, correct? Yes, sir. And on September the 12th, we met again, did we not? Yes, sir. Okay. You didn't look quite the same in September as you look now, did you? Probably not. Sir? Probably not. I don't know how I looked. Well, I mean, you have changed your appearance dramatically today, as opposed to the way you looked back in September, haven't you? All I did was shave my beard. Well, shaved your beard, cut your hair. Really, you don't look anything like you used to look, do you? Mr. Davis, sir, would you please answer my question? Yes, sir, you are right. All right. I guess that is just a coincidence that you have changed your appearance before you come before this jury today. Is that correct? Yes, sir. I don't suppose that you have given Mr. Mulder or Mr. Mosty or any of those other attorneys a written statement, have you? No, sir, I have not. So, as we have heard before, I don't have any way of knowing whether or not the story you are telling this jury this afternoon is the story that you came up with yesterday or the day before or the first day of trial. I don't have any way of knowing that, do I? Mr. Mulder says, excuse me, Judge, he gave a written statement to the police. Mr. Davis says, no, sir, I'm talking about one to Mr. Mulder since the trial has begun. The court says, I'll sustain the objection, answer the question. Mr. Greg Davis continues. So the answer is you have not given a written statement to Mr. Mulder or Mr. Mosty or any other attorney representing your wife, have you? No, sir. Okay. The sock that is in evidence, you know which one I'm talking about, don't you? The one that came from the alley? Yes, sir. That sock is yours? I don't know that. You don't? I haven't seen it. Do you want me to show you that sock? If you would. I mean, we know which sock we're talking about, don't we? I'm talking about the sock that the police found down the alley. Okay? Yes, sir. If we're in agreement on that sock, that is the one I'm talking about. That is your sock, the one that the police found down the alley. How do you know it's my sock? Well, because you told Corrine Wells back on December the 3rd of 1996 it was yours, didn't you? I said I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't mine. No, you remember Corrine Wells, don't you? Who? Corrine Wells? No, sir. Well, maybe let's take you back. You know the house that you lived in on Bond Street, don't you? Yes, sir. Okay. Matter of fact, you went there on December the 3rd of 96, didn't you? Yes, sir, I did. Yeah, she caught you out there looking at the window screens at that house at about 5:20 in the afternoon, didn't she? Yes, sir, she did. And then she started talking with you, and you went inside and talked with her for what, about an hour and a half to 2 hours, didn't you? Yes, sir, we had a good talk. And among the other things that you said was that that was your sock, that it had come from your utility room inside of your house, correct? Yes, sir. And you also told her that if Darlie wanted to take that sock and put it down the alley, it would take her only 27 seconds to do that, didn't you? No, sir, I didn't say that. That is something you didn't tell her? No, sir. That screen that was out there in the garage when you were out there on June the 5th of 96 for the inventory for the garage sale. Do you remember that time? Yes, sir. That screen wasn't cut then, was it? No, it wasn't. Matter of fact, the last time that you saw that screen that evening, everything was just fine on it, wasn't it? Yes, sir. And yet, when you went over there to Corrine Wells on December the 3rd of 1996, you went there for the purpose of seeing whether you had cut screens on your old house there at Bond, didn't you? Yes, sir, I did. So you were trying at that time, weren't you, Mr. Routier, to come up with some feasible story to tell this jury as to how that window screen got cut that evening, weren't you? No, sir, I was just very interested. You were just curious? I was very curious about whether the screens were cut over there on Bond Street? Yes, sir. The house that you haven't lived in 3 years? Yes, sir. Just a moment ago, when Mr. Mulder was questioning you, he started asking you about your wife's emotional state back in 95. And I wrote down that you said that she had the blues a couple of days and that didn't concern you. Is that right? Yes, sir, it didn't. Okay. Was that your testimony just a few minutes ago? Yes, sir. Matter of fact, isn't it true, Mr. Routier, that there were a lot of things that were troubling your wife back then? No. Do you know who Jamie Johnson is, Mr. Routier? CPS. Yes, sir. Do you remember talking with Jamie Johnson? Yeah, I do. You had a good long conversation with her, didn't you? Too long. Do you remember that you and Jamie Johnson discussed your wife's emotional state, and among other things, that you told her that your wife was depressed, tired, and was not herself? Do you remember making that statement to Jamie Johnson? Yes, sir, on those 2 days. Just 2 days? A few days? Okay, well, 2 days or a few days. What do you mean by a few days? 3, 4, 5? Give me a number. 2 to 3, probably. 2 to 3. Okay. And do you remember when you talked with Jamie Johnson that you told her that your wife had said to you, quote, "I'm sick of everything. I'm having a hard time getting the house cleaned." Do you remember that? It's a big house. Well, I didn't ask you how big your house was. Did I say that? Yes, sir. I don't know. I don't have that in front of me. So you don't know whether you said that to her. And do you remember also when you discussed this with Jamie Johnson that the kids came up during that discussion? Didn't they? Yes, sir, they did. The problems that the kids were causing your wife back in that time period? Those kids didn't cause us any problems at all, Mr. Davis. Let me ask you again. Did the kids come up in your conversation that you had with Jamie Johnson? Well, I don't have that information. I don't know what I said to Jamie Johnson. You just don't remember the conversation then? Sir, she was prying into my business. I didn't ask you that. I said, do you remember the conversation that you had with the CPS worker? Not all of it. Well, let me give you a statement then. Do you remember telling Jamie Johnson that your wife wanted everything perfect in that house? That she was a cleanaholic? It's, quote, "It's kind of an obsession. She will clean and clean, but the kids would be right behind her making bigger messes." You made that statement to Jamie Johnson, didn't you? I doubt it. You doubt it. Can I take that as a no then, Mr. Routier, that you didn't make that statement? I probably said some of it. She is a very clean person. Okay. I don't think that is all right. Well, let me just take it then. What part of it did you say? Did you say the word cleanaholic? Probably. Okay. Yes to cleanaholic. Next statement, quote, "It's kind of an obsession." Did you say that? No. That is a no. She will clean and clean. Did you say that? Yes. Quote, "But the kids would be right behind her making bigger messes." Did you say that? No, sir. Okay. So no to that. And in that same discussion, do you remember discussing with her the disappointment that your wife felt when Drake turned out to be a boy instead of a girl? Do you remember that? No. In fact, your wife was very disappointed that she didn't have a girl when Drake was born, didn't she? She very disappointed? No, she wasn't. Well, in that conversation with Jamie Johnson, y'all discussed that, didn't you? And didn't you make? We were both disappointed a little bit whenever we had the sonogram. We knew way before Drake was born that he was going to be a boy, and we were very proud of having another boy. Okay. So the disappointment didn't come at the time he was born. It came when you found out that you were going to have a boy. Is that right? It was a one day Gee, I wish we could have had a girl. Well, a blue period for one day this time? That wasn't a blue period. Well, what shade would you call it? What can you do? God gave us a boy. Would you say disappointed? Right? Not disappointed. Because you told Jamie Johnson, didn't you? Quote, of course, we wanted a little girl. We still do. You told Jamie Johnson that during that interview, didn't you? I did. Well, that is my question to you. Did you or not? I don't remember. So that is a maybe? Mr. Davis, I don't know exactly what all happened in that conversation with her. Okay. Would it be fair to say that you just don't remember whether or not you said that, right? Well, wouldn't that information be given in a civil case? Sir, would you please answer my question? My question to you is, do you remember making that statement to Jamie Johnson? I don't remember, no, sir. Okay. And in that same conversation, do you remember discussing with Jamie Johnson how the two boys, Devin and Damon, started to get in the way of your relationship with your wife? Do you remember that? No, sir, that is not true. That came up in that conversation, didn't it? No, it didn't. And do you remember what you told Jamie Johnson when you started talking about the two boys and your relationship that you got with your wife? Do you remember what you said to her? No. Let me read something. Do you remember in that conversation with Jamie Johnson that you said to her, quote, there was no time for me and mommy to be sexy or run around in the house naked? No, sir. Okay. That is a false statement. So if that is made by Jamie Johnson, that is either incorrect or she is lying. She is lying. She is a liar? No, lying, not a liar. Okay. Well, she is lying about that statement there? Yes, sir. Okay. And you also remember, don't you, your wife really took a lot of pride in her appearance, didn't she? She still does, doesn't she? It depends on how you look at it. Well, she likes to look nice. Okay. She is a very beautiful girl. Okay. Matter of fact, when Drake was born, she had a lot of trouble losing weight, didn't she? Not a lot of trouble. Okay. She used to be size 4 and she went to size 8, didn't she? 6. Okay. Do you remember telling Jamie Johnson about that? And you told Jamie Johnson that she went from a size 4 to a size 8. You said that to her, didn't you? Well, I don't believe so. So that is a no to that one. And then it is a fact, isn't it, that your wife was concerned enough about her appearance that she started taking diet pills, didn't she? Yes, sir, she did. She really wanted to go back to looking the way she had before Drake was born, didn't she? She only had 10 or 12 pounds to lose. I mean, after all, what, 2 or 3 years earlier, y'all had spent $5,000 for breast implants, hadn't you? Yes, sir, we did. So appearance was very, very important to your wife, wasn't it? Do you want an explanation for that? No, sir. I want you to answer my question, please. Her appearance was very important to her, wasn't it? Yes, it was. And it was very important to you, too, sir? Yes, sir, but it wasn't everything. And as a result of the weight gain with the baby, do you remember telling Jamie Johnson that she went into postpartum depression that was somewhat aggravated by her weight? That was part of her problem, wasn't it? No, sir, that was not it. Okay. So do I understand your answer to be that you did not tell Jamie Johnson that your wife was suffering from postpartum depression, somewhat aggravated by her weight? You didn't make that statement to her? No, sir. Well, it was serious enough at that time that she began taking diet pills, didn't she? Serious 10 to 12 pounds serious? I don't think so. Well, she was taking diet pills, wasn't she? Yes, sir, she was. So obviously, she thought it was important enough to her at that time to start voluntarily taking medication to get her weight down, didn't she? Yes, sir, just like her mother. What? Does her mother take diet pills too? And my mother. Okay. And her sister and my sister. So you really weren't concerned when she went to the doctor and started taking diet pills, even though she had 10 or 12 pounds. I don't guess that concerned you either, did it? No, sir. And when you came home that afternoon in May, on May the 3rd, and you found your wife upstairs on the bed writing that note in her journal, did I understand your testimony to be that you just had a good cry with her and you woke up the next day and everything was fine? Yes, sir. So when you went off to work that next day, you left convinced that even though your wife had been in the process of writing a note the day before, that everything is hunky-dory and Darin just goes off to work and Darlie is left there at home. That is what happened, isn't it? Mr. Davis, sir, did you go to work the next day? Yes, sir, I did. And Darlie stayed at home? Yes, sir. Mr. Mulder then says, excuse me, Judge, if he will just do him the courtesy of letting him answer his questions. The court says, sustained, just let him answer the question. Mr. Davis says, yes, sir, if he will answer the question that I have asked him. The court says, okay. Mr. Greg Davis says, yes, sir, thank you. And the court says, both sides just phrase your questions properly and answer just what he asks you, please, sir. Mr. Greg Davis then continues. Matter of fact, back when it all happened, you were a lot more concerned about it than you let on now, weren't you? No, sir. Matter of fact, back then, when it all happened, you really thought that your wife needed professional help to deal with her problem, didn't you? That is not true. I would have gotten it for her. Because when you talked with Jamie Johnson again, do you remember you discussed the problems that your wife was having? And do you remember you made the statement, quote, a light went on in my head saying she needs help. That is what you told Jamie Johnson, isn't it? No, sir. Now she is becoming a liar. So this is the one that trips the wire. And now Jamie Johnson is a liar, right? Yes, sir. All right. I wouldn't use that phrase. And did I understand you to say that even though your wife, you understood what your wife was attempting to do when you came home that day, didn't you? It was not an attempt. Well, you understood the situation, didn't you? Contemplation is the word I would like to use. Contemplating what? Contemplating on when to go to sleep and when to wake up. If you want to call it that. Well, when you take pills and you go to sleep and you don't wake up, wouldn't you call that? She didn't attempt it. Well, please answer my question. Wouldn't you call that, Mr. Routier? Yes, sir. If she had done it, it would have been. And you knew that on that day she was contemplating, right? But I was there. She called out for me. Sir, would you please answer my question? Yes, sir. And yet you didn't even pick up the journal, read anything that was being written that day? I mean, this was... No, sir. When I was there, I knew what was happening. Okay. You didn't need to read the journal, did you, to know what the situation was? No, sir. And during that time period, you did real well in 95 in your business, didn't you? Yes, sir. And you did gross over $264,000 that year, didn't you? Yes, sir. 96 was a little bit different though, wasn't it? Oh, really? I did $111,000 in 5.5 months. And 96 was going to be a little slower, wasn't it? Maybe by a couple thousand. And you had time periods, really, you had a couple of months that were a little bit slow right before the killings there in June, correct? Sir, that had nothing to do with this. Sir, did I take that to be a yes then? That you did have a couple of months that were a little slow? If you would let me explain, sir. Sir, did you have a couple of months? Mr. Mosty says, Your Honor, we fought this with the state's witness forever. The court says, Gentlemen, and Mr. Mosty says, Your Honor, he needs to be able to explain his answers. And the court says, all right, just answer the question. Just go ahead, ask the question and give the answer and explain your answer if necessary. Mr. Greg Davis says, I'll restate the question. Mr. Mosty says, let him explain it. The court says, Gentlemen, just a minute. Ask the question. He can explain his answer. Mr. Greg Davis says, yes, sir. Mr. Mulder says, Judge, excuse me, he has asked that question. Let him explain the answer. The court says, I'll let him explain the answer. Please be seated. Mr. Mulder says, thank you. The court says, thank you. Mr. Greg Davis then says, Mr. Routier, did you have a couple of months? The court then says, explain your answer to the last question. He is asking the same question again. Answer it and explain your answer. Okay? And the witness says, okay. Mr. Greg Davis then starts again. Did you have a couple of months out there at your business that were a little slow before the killings occurred in June of 96? Mr. Davis, whenever it's slow in our business, we try to enjoy it. And knowing that the hump is fixing to come back up and we're fixing to get blasted with work. So, sir, I don't know that I understood. Was that a yes? Yes, it was slow. Thank you. Comfortably slow. Comfortably slow? Yes, sir. Well, when things got comfortably slow there at your business, Mr. Routier, things got a little bit uncomfortable with your personal finances, didn't they? Not really. I just asked you, would you consider being 2 months in arrears on your mortgage comfortable or uncomfortable? Well, it would be uncomfortable if it was true, but it's not true. I'll show you, Mr. Routier, a letter. This is State's Exhibit 83-B. It's addressed to you and your wife from Mellon Mortgage Company. You remember that letter, don't you? I had already made that payment. Sir, do you recognize that? I don't remember ever seeing it. No. Addressed to you? It's addressed to me. And your wife? Yes, sir. Correct? Yes, sir. Matter of fact, this came out of your Pathfinder. You know that, don't you? No, I didn't know that is where it came from. So now your testimony is that even though the letter is dated May the 8th of 1996 and addressed to you at your home address of 5801 Eagle Drive, now you are saying that you don't recognize this letter? It doesn't mean I opened it. So again, your answer is you don't recognize it? I don't recognize it? No. Well, let me show you another letter then. This will be State's Exhibit 83-A. This is from American Express, dated May the 9th, about a balance of $954 due. It's addressed to you, actually addressed to Darlie Routier at 5801 Eagle Drive. Do you recognize State's Exhibit 83-A? Yes, sir, I do. Can I explain that? No. Do you recognize that? Yes, sir. Okay. So Mr. Davis at this point enters this exhibit as State's Exhibit 83-A and then asks the judge and says, Your Honor, may I briefly publish this to the jury? And the court says you may. And Mr. Davis says, thank you. This letter is dated May the 9th, 1996, addressed to Darlie Routier. It has a total undisputed balance of $954.64. Quote, Dear Darlie Routier, perhaps in these busy times you have forgotten to pay your American Express bill. Would you kindly take the time to send us payment for $954.64? Please use the enclosed envelope to mail your payment for the balance due today. If you have already sent your payment, thank you. Mr. Greg Davis then continues his questioning. How did you describe it on the tape? Living large? Mr. Mulder says, excuse me, Judge. He asked him a question about that, and he has an opportunity to explain it. The witness then says, in other words, Darin, no, that's all right. Mr. Greg Davis says, excuse me, I didn't ask him this. The court says, just a minute, gentlemen. That question and answer was over. Mr. Davis, ask another question. Mr. Davis says, thank you. Mr. Mulder says, thank you, Your Honor. The court says, thank you. Mr. Davis then continues. Living large has its costs, doesn't it, Mr. Routier? To some people. Well, you and the defendant were living large out there in Rowlett, weren't you? What is living large? Well, you tell me. Those are the words that you used on June the 14th of 1996 to Joe Munoz of Channel 5. What did, quote, living large mean to you back then? Having a family that loves you, having a house that could accommodate all of the family members, and having the ability to be able to go on trips and take them exactly where you want to go. Well, living large means having what you want, doesn't it? And what you need. And having a lot of it, right? Yes, sir. A 28-foot boat. That is a nice boat out there on Lake Ray Hubbard, isn't it? It's a nice boat. Yeah. A Redwood Spa. That was brand new. Put in your backyard in 95. Yes, sir. Okay. A new 2-door Jaguar. That was a nice car to drive. It was not new. 86. Sir, is that a two-door Jag that y'all got? Yes, sir. That is just part of living large, isn't it? A 1986? No. Sir, is that part of living large? Mr. Mosty says, Your Honor, let him answer the question. The court says, Mr. Mosty, please. Mr. Mosty says, he is explaining his answer. The court says, I understand. He can explain it. The question was, re-ask the question. Mr. Davis says, yes, sir. And the court says, and you may answer it any way you want to answer it. But please answer his question. Thank you. Mr. Davis then continues, is that part of living large? Okay. Yes, that is part of living large, I guess. Matter of fact, during that time period, it would be fair to say, wouldn't it, Mr. Routier, that you and your wife really got into kind of a situation where you got caught up in the material side of life, didn't you? The materialistic part of life had nothing to do with that. That was the fruits of your labor. When you bust your butt and you make a good living, that is what you deserve. Sir, did you and your wife get caught up on the material side of life during 1996? Somewhat. Matter of fact, isn't it true that it got to the situation where it was a little bit like a materialistic tornado for the two of y'all out there on 5801 Eagle Drive? No, sir. You know that phrase, don't you? No, sir, I don't. Do you remember speaking with a Rick Roberts of KRLD Radio on November the 19th, 1996? Yes, sir, I do. Do you remember stating to Rick Roberts, quote, I think we're so wrapped up in our careers, we're wrapped up as human beings, especially in a large city, that you get tied up in this materialistic whirlwind, this tornado. You remember saying that to Rick Roberts, don't you? Yes, sir. And I was trying to explain to people exactly how materialistic we all become and how we really need to change our lives, that the most important thing in life is our children and our family. That's right. That is something that you all forgot in 96, isn't it? You and the defendant. You got off the track. You got on the material side of life and you lost sight of your two children for a while, didn't you? No, sir, we did not. Mr. Davis, we had everything we wanted. Mr. Greg Davis says, sir. The court says, just answer the question. Go ahead. Mr. Greg Davis says, thank you. And then continues. I mean, you had a lot of expenses coming in that you had to deal with, didn't you? And also, I was making a lot of money. Well, not enough to pay all of your taxes for 95, did you? Well, I have always been behind on my taxes for the last 4 years. You were behind to the tune of $10,000 in your 95 taxes, weren't you? Yes, sir, I was. You had about $12,000 in credit card debt, correct? I'll take your word for it. Well, you don't have to take my word for it. Do you remember on July the 1st that I asked you about your debt situation at the bond trial? And I asked you about your bills and you said the credit card debt of $12,000. Do you remember that? Mr. Davis, when you make 1,000 to 2,000 sir. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. The Jaguar. That Jaguar had been broken down and that it would be fixed and then it would be broken down and you would have to fix it again. And that was kind of a long-standing problem with the Jag, wasn't it? Not really. It cost me $3 to get it fixed. Okay, I usually always fix it myself. Okay. Do you remember July the 1st, I asked you about that Jaguar and you said that your Jaguar was broken right now. How long has it been broken? Off and on, probably for the last 2 months. Is that what you said? Same hose. The $3 hose just kept breaking over and over again? Yes, I kept burning it through. It was on the back of the transmission. Okay. In your business, Rhett Williams, you know Rhett Williams, don't you? Yes, sir, I do. He does some work on your equipment, doesn't he? He did one time. What time did you call Rhett Williams on June the 5th, or was it June the 6th when you called him? I don't know. I had a power supply that went out on one of my pieces of equipment. Right. He was working on that, wasn't he? He was trying to fix it. Yes. All right. That was an important piece of equipment for you, wasn't it? Yes, sir. And I had one of my customers send me one of them for free. So you have got a very important piece of equipment that is down, And he had had it now for a couple of days by the 5th, hadn't he? Yes, sir. He was trying to fix it, but didn't know how. All right. And so my question to you is, when did you call him on the 5th? Did you call him on the 5th to talk with him about the piece of equipment to see when it was coming back to you? I don't know when I called him exactly. Well, you called him from your home, right? I don't know. Okay. Well, do you remember calling Rhett Williams? I did at one time. Yes, sir. Okay. And my question to you is, where were you when you called him? Where? Yes, sir. I don't know. I know Rhett Williams pretty well. Well, let me just ask you, after 7 p.m. on June the 5th, were you at home from that point on making phone calls? If you made a phone call, on what date? On the 5th, on that, what is going to be on the night before the murders. No, sir, I didn't make any phone calls that I believe. You didn't call Rhett Williams that day? Oh, I may have called him that day, but I don't know if I called him from home or from work. Let's talk about the insurance for a moment. You and the defendant had insurance policies, correct? Yes, sir. Both of the boys had insurance on them for $5,000 as riders, correct? Yes, sir. It's a family rider. How much insurance did you have on baby Drake? We haven't. He would have been added onto the policy automatically. Well, on June the 6th of 1996, he had no insurance on him, did he? I wouldn't know. I'm sure he would have been covered. Well, I mean, he is your child. Let me just ask you, have we called the insurance company to see? Sir, no. What I'm asking is, you have already told me on June the 6th, 96, that you had life insurance on the older boys, Devin and Damon, for 5,000 each, correct? Yes, sir. And I'm asking you, on June the 6th, 96, how much life insurance did you have on baby Drake? He was only 6 months old. We hadn't taken care of that yet. Okay, so none? None. Actually, I think our insurance company would have covered it. It's an automatic family rider. That evening on June 5th of 96, you said that Dana came home from work with you and she stayed at your house for a period of time and then you took her back home to Garland, right? Yes, sir. She had been staying there overnight at your house, hadn't she? Off and on? Yes, sir. Okay. Actually, she had been staying off and on for about 2 weeks. Actually, this is the first night that your sister-in-law didn't stay overnight. Is the night of these murders, isn't it? I wouldn't know. Well, weren't you staying there? I was staying at the house, but I'm real bad with dates. And times? A lot of times, yeah. Mm-hmm. Just not very good on details? No, I can remember details. I'm just not real good with dates. Well, I'm not asking for the dates. I'm just asking you, up to that time, had your sister-in-law been staying overnight at your house? Off and on? Yes, sir. She didn't stay overnight that night, did she? No, sir. And when you talk about your wife sleeping downstairs, I mean, the reason that she was sleeping downstairs is because she is a very light sleeper, isn't she? No. Well, she woke up every time that baby moved in its crib, didn't she? That is a mother's instinct. Well, that is something that me and you don't understand. Well, I think I understand it. Okay, I'm asking you right now, wouldn't you consider that to be a light sleeper? Someone that is a light sleeper can't sleep with a TV on. Yeah, I was getting to that point. Your wife was sleeping down there with the TV on that night, wasn't she? Yes, sir. And that's how I sleep too. Well, that didn't keep her from sleeping, right? Right? Slept down in the same room where Damon was sleeping right next to her. That didn't keep her from sleeping either, did it? Well, the boys had decided that they were going to sleep in that room that night, and they had already went and got their pillows and their blankets. All right. Well, my question again, did Damon keep her up that night, or was she able to sleep with him in the same room? Damon? Damon, your younger child, your middle child, Damon? Did he keep her awake? Yes, sir. No. How about Devin? He was sleeping in the same room also, wasn't he? Mm-hmm. He didn't keep her up either? Well, they don't root and grunt. And apparently, wouldn't you agree with me that your wife apparently was able to sleep while your older child, Devin, was stabbed twice in the chest? She slept through that too, didn't she? Yes, sir, she did. And then she slept through your middle child being stabbed 4 times in the back, correct? Yes, sir. And then she actually slept through her own stabbing, didn't she? Mr. Davis, we don't know that information. Oh, we do. You do? Yes, sir. She has already told you. Remember, she told you that she woke up and a man was walking away from her. Could I ask you a question? No, sir, but you can answer my questions. Hadn't she already told you, Mr. Routier, that when she woke up, that Damon pushed on her, woke her up, and then she saw this man walking away? Isn't that right? She was obviously attacked while she was sleeping, right? That's what we did. That's all we did was go to sleep that night. Sir, wouldn't you agree with me that your wife's story to you means that she slept through her own stabbing and didn't wake up until your middle child woke her up there on the couch? Yes, sir. Let me talk to you about this window for a moment out in the garage. How good is your memory of that window that night? Real good? Pretty good. Has your memory gotten better over the last few months, or worse, or the same about this event? Some things, when you talk about it 250 times, you start to remember things that you didn't remember before. Well, back on September the 12th of 96, Mr. Mulder was not your attorney yet, was he? No, sir, he was not. Mr. Mosty wasn't on the case either, right? No, sir. So you had not had an opportunity to talk with either of those two gentlemen, correct? No, sir. Do you remember testifying just a moment ago that the window, when you saw it out there that evening, was up 6 to 8 inches, correct? Before I went to bed, yes, sir. All right. And we're talking about the window that you later saw the screen cut on. That is the window that I'm talking about, just so we're clear. Is that the one you are talking about too? Yes, sir. And you are sure it was 6 to 8 inches up? I'm very sure. Are you as sure of that as you are about the rest of the things that you have testified about this afternoon? No. Because do you remember we talked about that window back on September the 12th also? Didn't we? I don't remember. You don't remember what you told me about the window and how open it was back then? I know when I went back into the house and I saw and I walked through there, it was open all the way up. Correct. With a slit all the way across from one end to the other. That's right. Because remember, I asked the question, quote, was the window also raised somewhat? And you said, yes, it was. It had been raised up about that much. Normally, it was raised the full, 36 inches or however big that window is. Sometimes it was raised up that high. Well, you remember you said, quote, it was raised the full, 36 inches or however big that window is. And I said that? Yes, sir, you did. Would you like for me to show you that? If you would, please. Yes, sir, I'll be happy to. The court then says, ladies and gentlemen, I intend to continue with this witness. Thank you. Mr. Greg Davis then says, thank you, Judge, and then continues to question. My question was on line 17 of page 168, and your answer began on line 19. Look at this sentence. The answer is going to be, quote, you. Yes. Do you see that now? Yes, sir. Okay. That is what you said back on September the 12th. Isn't it, Mr. Routier? Yes, sir, but I didn't say that is how far up it was that night when I went to bed. Okay, the garage door. You just testified a few minutes ago that when you were out there with the inventory for the garage sale, that the garage door was up, correct? The garage door, it was up when I was out there. I had pulled it down before I went to bed. All right, so before you ever went back inside that house, you closed it and you latched it, didn't you? Latched it from the inside. Matter of fact, you locked the doors. You locked both the front and the back doors of the residence before you went to bed, didn't you? No, sir, I didn't. I locked the front door and only the garage door. I never locked the door in between the garage and the utility room. Sir, on September the 12th of 96, do you remember me asking you the question after we had talked about the garage door? Quote, And the other doors in the house were locked when you went to sleep also? Do you remember what your answer was back then, Mr. Routier? That they were all locked. Would you like for me to? I would. Would you like for me to show you your answer? If you would, yes, sir. I'll be happy to. My question begins on page 168 at line 3. Your answer was at line 5. Do you see your answer? Quote, the other doors in the house, they were locked when you went to bed? Yes, sir. And your answer was? Yes, sir. Correct? Yes, sir. Okay. The garage door and the front door were locked. You see, that is not the question that I asked back on September the 12th, though, was it? I didn't say, quote, did you lock the garage door and the front door? That is not the question that I asked. Did I? You said all doors. I said the other doors in the house. You understood what I meant back then, didn't you? Well, I'm not really sure if I did or not. Sir, that is your house. You know how many doors. You have a front door and a door to the garage, and you have a garage door, don't you? And a sliding glass door and 48 windows. That's right. Matter of fact, the sliding glass was also locked, wasn't it? Yes, sir, it was. Okay. All exterior doors were locked. And again, I understand your testimony to be that the window was not cut when you were out there on June the 5th, correct? That's correct. Now, kids had come in and out of that window quite a bit in the past, hadn't they? I didn't know that. I have never seen them do it before. Well, you had heard about the kids coming in to get popsicles and other things out of the freezer in the garage, hadn't you? I had some neighborhood kids tell me that. All right. And as a matter of fact, the window frame itself is a little bent at the bottom where they had pulled the window screen back and hopped in the window, and then they would go across there and get popsicles and come back out, correct? I don't know. That big old stain there between the freezer and the window, that was a bunch of popsicles, Kool-Aid, and other things, wasn't it? I don't know. I didn't examine it. And that had been there for some time, hadn't it? Probably. It would have to be washed out if it was in there. Okay. That evening, Mr. Routier, when you came downstairs, you never saw an intruder, did you? No, sir, I didn't. You never heard an intruder? No, sir. You never saw a vehicle leaving your residence, correct? No, I didn't. And you never heard a vehicle leaving from your residence, did you? No, sir, I didn't hear anything but screams. Now, I want to turn your attention to another area of your testimony with Mr. Mulder, where you started telling about what you did with Devin and Damon, okay? And as I understand your testimony, when you were over there with Devin, you testified that your wife went and got some towels and then brought them over there to you while you were actually blowing into his chest, right? Yes, sir. Okay. Now, Mr. Routier, that is the first time that you have told that story to anyone, isn't it? Not into his chest. It was when I was blowing into his mouth. All right, into his mouth. That is the first time that you have ever told that where your wife is over there next to you while you are doing that, isn't it? Well, I guess so. Although we have talked about that subject before, haven't we? Yes, sir. We never got into the details. Well, let's check that out. Let me go into some of that with you. A matter of fact, we went into pretty good detail because I have asked you before what your wife was doing while you were performing CPR on Devin, haven't I? Do you remember those? I don't remember. Okay. September 12th, again, do you remember I asked you this question, quote, when you came into this Roman room and you went to Devin, did your wife follow you over to Devin? And you said, no, not at that point. She went straight to the phone. She went straight to the sink to get towels. Do you remember that? Yes, sir. Is that correct? That's correct. Okay. Well, that phone that we're talking about is on the wall in the kitchen, correct? Close to the family room? It was a cordless phone, right? But actually, it's got a little cradle up on the wall, doesn't it? Yes, sir. Is that where she went to get the phone? I guess it could have been on the counter or anywhere. That is just the charger. And how long did you stay over with Devin? In minutes? Yes, sir. I don't know. It seemed like forever. Well, do you know how long you were over there? Probably 2 or 3 minutes. Okay. Back on September 12th, do you remember I asked you and you said, quote, probably 3 to 4 minutes? Does that sound about right? I have no idea. Well, just in general, how good a recall of this evening do you have? Mr. Davis, I have thought about this for 265 days. Does that mean that you have a good recall? I try to remember as much as I can. All right, well, for this purpose, your memory has got a lot better about a lot of things since September the 12th, hasn't it? I'm a lot more emotionally strong, too. Okay, well, I noticed that you were trying to cry up there in front of this jury when I talked to you on September the 12th. Trying to cry? Yes, sir. That is exactly right. You didn't have any problems. You didn't try to cry on September the 12th with me, did you? Well, sir, I was taking antidepressants. You weren't crying back then, were you? Well, I don't remember. I just remember being very scared. Do you remember back on September the 12th, I asked you, quote, how much of this evening do you really remember in great detail? And do you remember what you said to me back on September the 12th? Probably not very much. I was in shock. Yeah. Not very much. Yeah. And yet today, you remember which paramedic knocked over which lampshade and which paramedic righted the coffee table. I don't remember which one did what. All I can tell you is that they were paramedics. I wouldn't know their faces if they were sitting right here in front of me. That is another thing. Back on September the 12th, you didn't even recognize David Waddell, did you? No, sir, I didn't. And I looked right at him. You do now, though, don't you? Well, I wouldn't know him unless he was standing in here. Well, do you remember that we went on and we talked for a little bit more about your wife's activities while you were with Devin? And do you remember, quote, all right, where was your wife during the time that you were with Devin? And your answer, quote, she was in the kitchen getting kitchen towels out of the thing. I could hear the water running, and then she took them over. She brought towels over to Damon. Do you remember answering that? Over to Damon and over to Devin. She probably made 6 or 7 trips back and forth to the sink. Well, let me direct your attention back to your answer back on September the 12th and your answer beginning at line 20. Quote, Mr. Routier, did you mention anything about her bringing towels over to Devin? And that answer, sir? Can I see that? Yes, that is a true statement. She was going back and forth from Devin to Damon. Well, you just read that answer out to this jury so they can see what your answer was back on September the 12th? Okay, you said, quote, all right, where was your wife during the time that you were with Devin? She was in the kitchen getting kitchen towels out of the thing. I could hear the water running, and then she took them over and brought towels over to Damon. All right, to Damon? Yeah, to Damon. Not to Damon and Devin? Well, I didn't finish my sentence. Well, there is a period after that. You mean you just didn't think of it back then? Well, back then I was not getting my full statements out. Well, I didn't cut you off then, did I? No, sir. Matter of fact, we have talked about it again. That is not the last time that we talked about that. Back on September the 12th, is it? Do you remember the other questions about that? Which hearing was that? This was the no bond hearing. Do you remember that one? Very well. Yes, sir. All right. Matter of fact, do you remember you told me that during the time that you were doing the CPR on Devin, that about all you could see of your wife was her head as she walked between the kitchen sink and the wine rack back and forth in the kitchen? Yeah, back and forth about 6 or 7 times. Right, in the kitchen. She wasn't over there where you were? No, she was from the kitchen to Damon over to Devin. How did those towels get to me? I didn't get them. Sir, you never did, in your testimony of September 12th, ever mention your wife coming over there and doing anything with Devin, did you? I wasn't asked. Sir, I asked you a lot of times about what your wife was doing. Do you remember that? A lot of things I don't remember. Well, let me go to page 143. Actually, page 142. I asked you again. All right, so whatever you say then is directed toward Devin, who you were attending to. Is that correct? Yes. Mm-hmm. That, and then me waiting for Darlie to get off the phone so I could find out what happened. I mean, your wife was on the phone to 911 the entire time? I heard what happened from what Darlie was saying to 911. She didn't have to repeat it to me. Okay. And then I asked you, quote, well, then I take it that during the entire time that you were with Devin, she is still on the phone. And your answer to that is probably about right. Correct? I wouldn't put it in those words. All right. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Well, I want you to make sure that I have not misquoted you. If you will look at page 142, lines 16 through 17 or 18, that is my question. Your answer is, quote, that is probably about right. Have I correctly stated what you answered back on September the 12th? Yes, sir. You just said it with some sarcasm. Oh, the truth of the matter is, back on September the 12th, your testimony, during that hearing, it was very important for you to put your wife by that kitchen sink as much as you could, wasn't it? Not really. I wasn't even discussed about it. Sir, I never even talked with anyone about it. Matter of fact, that is one of the very first things that you told me that you remembered about your wife that evening, wasn't it? What? That she went directly to the kitchen sink? She grabbed the phone, she went to the kitchen sink, she was going from Devin and Damon back and forth rendering aid. Matter of fact, when you talked with Jamie Johnson again, you never mentioned anything about your wife being there with you while you were doing CPR on Devin, did you? I didn't feel like I had to tell anybody anything. Even though she is asking you questions about the event, you didn't feel the need to answer those questions? Matter of fact, I wish I hadn't. I bet you do. Matter of fact, your wife, she didn't do CPR on Devin, did she? No, sir. She doesn't know how to do CPR. I did. That's correct. She didn't do CPR on Damon either, did she? No, she did what she could. She got help there as fast as possible. What is it that she did with Damon? She put towels on his back. She was talking to him, trying to comfort him. She kept yelling that, quote, he was alive just a minute ago. He was alive just a minute ago. All right. So she laid a towel on his back, correct? Yes, sir. Okay. And when I went over, I picked up that towel. Okay. And she didn't move Damon. Is that correct? No, sir. I told her not to. Matter of fact, you never moved him either, right? No, sir. I was afraid to. You were afraid to touch him, and you didn't lift up his shirt either, did you? Yes, I did. Are you sure about that? Yes, sir. I saw the blood. The court reporter then says, excuse me, you saw what? I saw the wound in the center part of his back. Do you remember on September the 12th, I asked you, quote, was that room pretty dark? And your answer was, well, once the light is off, it is, but I didn't see any blood or anything wrong with him. You are talking about Damon. Quote, I mean, I didn't visually see it because it was like Devin's wounds, but I never lifted his shirt up or anything. I was afraid to touch him. I wasn't afraid to touch him. He was my son. I lifted his shirt up. It was a black shirt, so blood was not as apparent as what it would be if you were exposed to, an exposed open wound. Mr. Routier, back on September the 12th, do you remember the oath that you took as a witness? Don't you? Yes, sir. The very same oath that you took this afternoon when you hit that witness stand, wasn't it? Yes, sir. And you took an oath back on September the 12th to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, didn't you? Yes, sir. Now, sir, when you said, quote, I never lifted his shirt up or anything, I was afraid to touch him, you were telling the truth back on September the 12th, weren't you? Just as I am telling the truth now. Well, I'm having a hard time understanding how it could be true that you never lifted his shirt up and how it could be that you did lift his shirt up. Mr. Davis, I was there. Sir, did you lift it up or did you not lift it up? Yes, sir, I did lift it up. All right. So when you said, quote, I never lifted it up on September the 12th, that was not true, was it? Not all true. Sir, I don't remember doing it. Okay. I checked his pulse and I couldn't get one. Okay. The court then says, Mr. Davis, will you be much longer? And Mr. Davis says, no, sir. Well, Judge, it could be The court then says, well, I think the best thing to do is the jury has been very patient with us, and I appreciate that. Mr. Craig Davis says, yes, sir. And the court says, we will continue tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Please be seated in the courtroom, please. So at this point, the jury is excused from the courtroom for the day. But what continues is some other information between everybody else that's in the room, the attorneys and of course Darlie and the judge. So the court says, tells Darin that he can step down. The witness says, thank you. And then the court says, can I see both sides up here a minute? And then the court continues. Mr. Biggerstaff will let y'all out the door when it's time to go. And then if everybody would clear the courtroom, please. If somebody wants to, if any members of the press want to come back in, that will be fine. We need the whole courtroom cleared when Mr. Biggerstaff says so. All right. I'm going to have the attorneys here at 8:30 in the morning. We are having that hearing on that thing with Patterson. Mr. Greg Davis says, yes, sir, that is fine. All right. The court says, if you will be here at 8:30. Mr. Davis says, yes, sir. Mr. Mulder says, yes, sir. And the court says, all right, we will see everybody then. Thank you. Okay, so let's recap what we have learned so far in this episode. When Darin arrived at the hospital, he was first taken to a room where Officer Chris Frosch was going in and out, according to Darin, and so was Terry Neal, the neighbor who had brought him into the hospital. If you remember, we learned in an earlier episode that Officer Frosch and Terry Neal were related. They were cousins by marriage. And we learned this in Detective Patterson's testimony. According to Darin, Frosch was asking him about what had happened, but it's unclear if Terry was in the room while this was happening. He also then mentioned Patterson showing up and also questioning him. We learned that they made him remove all of his clothing, and they took photos of him. Darin said that when the ambulance left, the one that had Darlie in it, he said that both he and Darlie knew that the boys had died. He also said that when he showed up to see Darlie at the hospital, she was an emotional wreck. He was able to see her also the next day, and this is the same day when Terry and Karen Neal brought Drake up to Darlie's room where Karen was able to set him on Darlie's lap. Now, I did find it interesting that when Darin is asked about Drake being brought in, that he said, quote, they brought the baby up, not Drake, just the baby. And when he's describing about what they did with Drake to hand him to Darlie, he refers to Drake as it. Quote, we kind of lifted it up on top of Darlie. So I found that was kind of weird terminology to me coming from a father. Anyway, so Darin said he did notice bruising on her arms, but assumed that they were from the cut on the top of her arm. He then talks about how he and Darlie went willingly to the police station to give their statements, and how Darin requested during the giving of his statement that he have it audio taped or videotaped because he could do that better than writing it down. But this never happened. We learn also that on the 6th, on the day of the crime, Darin gave the police the keys not only to his house, but to the boat, to the sheds, I'm not sure what he's referring to here, and the business. We learned that every time the police called him and Darlie and asked them to come in, they came. And Darin said that he was told that the police had told him that they had hundreds of leads in the case. We also learn the whys about this song, Gangster's Paradise, that was played at the funeral, as well as other songs that were played. Why pocket knives were put into the casket and what those cards were that were put into the casket. They were not tarot cards, but rather playing cards from their uncle, who was a magician. When Darin and Darlie had the ability to walk through the house after the police had released the scene, it was 13 days later. And this is when Darin said that they found glass shards in the wine bucket on the wine rack. Additionally, after the police had released the house, evidently there was some kind of emergency search warrant that was issued for a black cap in the house. Why they didn't notice this before? I mean, if they're talking about the same cap that was like on the utility room floor, I don't I mean, it was right there. I don't understand why they just didn't pick it up then. But anyway, so 13 days go by. They've had this house the whole entire time. They take out virtually everything, including the sinks in the house. They took some pipes, they took some traps, but they forget a black cap. And so they go back in and they had to get this emergency search warrant. But instead of contacting Darin to get into the house, they instead kicked the back door in and used a crowbar to pry it open. We also learned that because the police, during their initial 13 days, had taken the sinks, some pipes, and the traps, that when the air conditioning kicked on inside the house, everything began to leak. And as such, the ceilings started to get soaked with water. The ceilings started to fall in. The floors were damaged. Darren's then asked if he had insurance, and he said that he did, but he didn't collect it because they, and I'm assuming it's the insurance company, told him that because of the nature, it was cut off by the prosecution objecting. So we do never find out what he was going to say. Another thing that I've always been curious about that has not yet been touched on is whether or not Darlie was left or right-handed. And we find out that she is right-handed. So when Greg Davis begins to question Darin, Davis kind of starts off with kind of a petty thing, talking about how Darin's appearance looks different from the last time he saw him in September. So it's been like 3 or 4 months, right? When Darin is asked about the sock that was found in the alleyway down from the Routier home, Davis said, "Hey, it was your sock," meaning Darin's, but Darin says that he doesn't know that it's his sock. We also learn that in early of December of 1996, that Darin ended up going to his old house on Bond Street to check the screens there. Now, I don't believe that they still owned the house, but a neighbor found him doing it, looking at these screens. And Darin and this neighbor, Corrine Wells, had a long conversation, evidently that afternoon. And according to Davis, Darin had told Corrine that it was his sock that was found down the alley behind the Routier home. I'm curious about why he went over to his old house to check the screens. This wasn't really expanded on in this testimony, so I'm unsure as to why he actually did that. Did he think that he was the target of something and wondered if maybe someone had first targeted that house? Because, they had lived there, I think they said 3 years prior. We then hear a lot about this person named Jamie Johnson. And in the testimony, we learned that she was from CPS, or Child Protective Services. What we don't learn in the trial, though, was the reason for Jamie talking with Darin. So here's kind of how that came about. We know that Darlie was arrested on June 18th of 1996. However, what I was not aware of was that when this happened, Drake was then put into foster care. So in early of July of 1996, just shortly after the crime and after Darlie's arrest, Jamie spoke with Darin, the person from CPS, and determined that Drake should go into the custody of his grandparents, which were Darin's mom and dad. Darin is allowed to see Drake at this point, but he cannot be alone with him. During testimony, the prosecution also brings up things that from Jamie that Darin had evidently told her. Things like that Darlie was severely depressed. He called his wife a cleanaholic and that she liked to clean and clean. So essentially, Davis is really trying to make the point that Darlie liked a clean house and that the boys kept messing it up as a motive to get rid of them. Really? She loves animals. Animals aren't exactly clean. She didn't seem to be bothered by that. Plus, she always had other kids in the neighborhood at her place. If she was so concerned about a clean home, why would she then allow that? It really, really sounds like a very weak argument to me. We then hear from the prosecution that Darin had told Jamie Johnson that he felt that the boys were getting in the way of his relationship with Darlie. Now, this is Darin, but Darin denies having said that at all. I mean, he even goes as far as to call Jamie a liar. Davis then goes on to talk about Darlie, because obviously she's the one on trial, wanting to lose weight after having a baby, but makes it out to be something bad. I mean, come on, seriously? If you've had kids, of course you want to lose weight after having a baby. This is not something uncommon. But Davis makes it out to be this terrible, horrible thing to want to do. He then asked Darin if he knew that when he came home that day in May, when Darlie was writing in her journal, that he knew that she needed more help than he was letting on. And he said no, that things were fine the next day, and that's the reason why he went to work. Now, I personally can't say that I agree with his decision to go back to work the following day, no matter what he felt about how Darlie was feeling. He should have taken the day off the next day. Just my opinion, but that would have been the right thing to do. Darin does say that he prefers to use the word contemplating doing something, meaning the S word, but absolutely refuses to admit that Darlie may have gone through with it, saying things like, quote, she didn't attempt it. Davis then tries to steer the reason for the crime to the fact that for a couple of months, things were slow in the business. And we then learn about mortgage payments that were behind. There was an American Express card that hadn't been paid, and an interview that Darin did with a local news reporter where he used the term, quote unquote, living large. And Darin gives a variety of responses to this in trial. We do learn, though, that he was behind on his taxes and owed about $10,000 along with $12,000 in credit card debt. Now, all of this information is based on one of the bond hearings, and I will link to that in the show notes below if you're interested in listening to those. There's two of them where Darin testified. We then learn here that there is a family insurance rider on the children for $5,000 for each child. This is not something unusual. Davis then talks about how Dana, Darlie's sister, had been staying with Darin and Darlie, had been staying at their house with them off and on. And the night of the crime, she didn't happen to be there, which if she was staying off and on, then that really wouldn't be a big deal, right? But Davis makes it out to be that way. We then get into the discussion of why Darlie was sleeping downstairs and whether or not she was a light sleeper, and how, if this is the case, how did she sleep through the crime itself, including herself being injured? Personally, I've always kind of gone back and forth on this. I really don't believe that the reason that she was sleeping downstairs was because she was a light sleeper. This is just my opinion. I believe that there was probably something going on between Darin and Darlie, and she was downstairs for an entirely different reason, but they didn't exactly want to make this public. And again, this is just my pure speculation, just what I'm thinking. But I don't know that I'm buying the fact that she was down there because she was a light sleeper. We find out also that during this testimony that it's brought up that that Darin had said that the window in the garage, when he was out in the garage trying to look at things for this garage sale, that the window in the garage was only up about 6 to 8 inches, but that he had also, in another testimony, said that the garage window was all the way up. Davis then tries to trip him up by talking about what he had said about locking all the doors in the house the night of the crime. You know, hey, did you go through? Did you lock all the doors? But it's kind of misleading because the door from the garage to the utility room, according to Darin, was never locked. And Davis tries to get him to admit that he lied by saying that all the doors were locked. I think that was his goal. We're kind of splitting hairs here, right? Hey, were all the doors locked? Well, yeah, because you think, hey, I do my back door, front door, whatever doors that lead from the outside. And it's just very, very nitpicky, but Davis will do whatever he can to make Darin sound as if he's lying about something. Essentially, Davis takes Darin's previous testimony about what happened that evening, the previous testimony from the bond hearings, and tries to find the discrepancies in his current testimony. There are a few, but the main thing that Davis tries to get at is that in the previous testimony, Darin never mentioned Darlie coming over to help him with Devin. Now, this could mean a few things. First, our memories are funny. We may remember something that happened much later after the fact, or we could suppress things that happened that are just too terrible to remember at all. I'm not sure where my personal feelings are with Darin on this one. I kind of feel as if he is just remembering more as time goes on, but I can tell that Davis is attempting to get the jury to believe that he's lying for his wife. However, this got me to thinking about what exactly the differences were in the testimonies that he's given so far. And here is what Darin testified to based on the bond hearing, which was way earlier, and the trial. There's quite a few things. One of them is the location of Darlie when Darin first came downstairs. During the bond hearing, he says that Darlie was at the bottom of the stairs when he came down. During the trial, he's saying that Darlie was in the area between the kitchen and the family room by the bar and the sink when he first came downstairs. The second one is Darlie going to the kitchen sink. So during the bond hearing, Darin says he could hear water running, and Darlie was getting towels out of, quote, the thing, likely referring to a drawer. He says she went to the sink after calling 911. During the trial, Darin testified that he saw Darlie go straight to the kitchen sink to get wet towels while he was performing CPR on Devin before the police arrived. The third thing is Darlie performing first aid. So at least, yeah, let's just leave it at that, first aid. So during the bond hearing, Darin says that Darlie placed a towel on Damon's back. He also says that she was screaming for help and there was no mention of, any kind of first aid. During the trial, Darin said that Darlie was going back and forth between the boys, trying to stop the bleeding and comfort them. And let's get into the whole lifting of Damon's shirt. During the bond hearing, Darin states that he did not roll Damon over because of a possible back injury, okay? But he does not explicitly say whether he lifted his shirt or not. Now, during trial, Darin first said, hey, he never lifted the shirt, but then he changed it and said he did lift it and saw a wound on Damon's back. So there is the discrepancy there. And that's kind of where we left things off. Now, Darin's testimony is not finished. We still have quite a bit to go through with him. But before that happens, some other witnesses are going to be taking the stand. So the next witness is Jimmy Patterson. When we left off with him, they were in the discussion about the microphone at the gravesite. And Patterson had to get off of the stand and take some time to consult federal and state laws and likely an attorney about this line of questioning. So at that time, he was released. But now he's coming back on the stand to continue this testimony. After Patterson, we next have Officer Frosch, and he then gets on the stand, and then we have the remainder of Darin's testimony. Thank you all for listening. You are all so appreciated. If you'd like to support the show, consider donating through the new platform that I'm using, which is Buy Me a Coffee. And here, you can get access to things not available to the general public. Your contributions help improve content, they cover production costs, and bring you even more stories. Now, the link for that will be available in the show notes if you want more information. And with that said, thank you for being such an amazing part of the Beach House 34 community, and I will be back with the rest of Jimmy Patterson's testimony very soon. Bye for now.